Allahi wa barakatuh. Good evening. On behalf of the Madinah Society at the University of Manchester, I'd like to welcome you all to this debate on atheism. I'm not a student nor a lecturer here at the university, but my name is Usman and I've been asked to moderate this evening's debate. Before we get into any introductions or house rules, if you wouldn't mind, those sat in the middle, if you could just come towards the middle a little bit, because there are people coming and it will just save people walking over you during the course of the debate. So if you wouldn't mind just shuffling a bit closer together, particularly those in the middle, so it's just easier for those who are joining us as our couple of hours or so progress. Our debaters this evening are two people who I guess are recognized for their debating skills. So we have Guy Otten, who's the chairman of the Greater Manchester Humanists and also has recently qualified as a humanist chaplain, and he may want to say more about that. And on my left is Shaykh Asrar Rashid, who I'm sure is no stranger to many of you, and has been to the University of Manchester many times, a renowned Muslim theologian hailing from Birmingham. The topic of this evening's debate is the existence of God, and both our debaters will be presenting their points of view for the existence of God and for the non-existence of God. Just in terms of the format for this evening, both our debaters will have opening statements lasting 20 minutes. They have timers in front of them, and I will try my best to keep them to time. The remainder of the event after the 20 minutes will be open to the floor for questions and the answers from the debaters. But please bear in mind that word questions. From the floor, we don't want speeches, we want questions to our debaters. Just in terms of the house rules, and I may have to remind you of them after the opening statements, I would request that audience members do not interrupt or interject at any point during the speaker's opening presentations. If we find people don't want to comply with this, then unfortunately we'll have to take action. Any questions that you may have, please note them and wait until the end of both presentations to ask those questions. For those who want to, I guess, ask their questions on paper rather than verbally, can write them down, give them to one of the volunteers who will pass them forward. During the question and answer session, audience members are only allowed to ask questions. No further contributions or comments will be allowed. And again, we ask that you respect this house rule. Audience members may ask a maximum of one question per speaker, so potentially you have two questions, one per speaker. If you want to take up anything with them beyond that, you may have opportunity after the end of the event. And I would request that questions must relate to points mentioned in the presentation or around the topic of this evening's debate, i.e. the existence of God. And we want to undertake this debate, as I'm sure all of you as well want to, in a good, natured environment. So any derogatory remarks towards any person or the speakers will not be tolerated, and we will unfortunately have to ask for the removal of that person. Just also to add, yes, sir.
So just ask one question. Would we be able to ask a question of both speakers? So, you know, if I had a question, could I address that to both speakers?
So if you had one question, you could ask it to both speakers. Yes, that's fine.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's okay.
Yeah,
So you can ask one question to both speakers, or you can ask each speaker a question. Just also to add that we have two colleagues of ours who are undertaking security duties this evening. We're hoping we won't have to call on their services, but they're here to keep all of us safe. Now, that's the house rules out the way, and now we'll be progressing to hearing from the speakers for this evening. But just before we do that, reading around the topic of living in a godless society or the rise of atheism. Last year's British Attitude Survey found that more than half of the people in this country say they now have no religion. 3/4 of 18 to 24-year-olds, many of that age group perhaps sat in this hall, say they have no religion. Richard Dawkins talks about the God delusion. His book, he claims, has been downloaded over 3 million times, the unofficial Arabic version, over 3 million times in Saudi Arabia. Now, the number of ex-Muslims in America has increased in the last few years by 50%. So that sets the context for this debate in which we're talking about the existence of God and people's connection to that. So firstly, I'm going to ask Mr. Otten, the chairman of the Greater Manchester Humanists, to make his opening statement, and I believe he has a presentation. Just as he walks over there, just one final point in terms of the house rules. The microphones for the questions, we have 2 microphones when we get to the questions. There'll be volunteers from the Madinah Society in either aisle. We'd ask you to come to the end of the aisle to ask your questions. Is that okay, Hamza? So we'll have volunteers in either aisle, and who'll be holding the microphones. Please come to the end of the aisle for your mic. I'm going to undertake a bit of a David Dimbleby type role and pick people, and we'll probably call you out by the colour of your shirt or your topi. All right, Mr. Otten.
I don't think this is working.
I don't think any of them are working. You're just going to have to shout.
All right. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Good. Okay. If anybody can't hear me, could they indicate when my voice starts going? Well, thank you first for inviting me to share this platform this evening with the learned Shaykh. And I see this as a good way, actually, of understanding and getting to know each other. I'm actually not that interested in debating sort of dryly and intellectually. It's about dialogue. It's about understanding. So first, a present for you believers. Yep. I thought, you might appreciate that one. So I was struck by the title I was given, Reasons and Proof for Why There Is No God, for reasons that I will give you as I go along. So I prefer instead to talk about naturalism, origins and probabilities, and you'll see why those are relevant issues, as I say. I'll leave proofs and that kind of stuff to the Q&A. And instead I'll set out first the philosophical underpinnings of atheism, and then I'll touch on the human culture, including religion, and how it emerged and changed, and then say a few words about the origins of religion's interest in morality. And I'll finish off by discussing or offering some probabilities to help you through this minefield, which is so important. So atheism itself is not a worldview. Atheism is not a worldview. Would you like me to say, change slide or something? Yeah? Okay. Atheism is not a worldview. It is just a position on the God claim. Whether the question of whether or not there is a God is actually not the central concern for naturalists. The underlying philosophy for me and for many of us is called philosophical naturalism. So, change. What is philosophical naturalism? Essentially, it is that the world that we live in and are part of is what there is. That is reality. There is essentially no other reality that we know about. And it follows from this that we know of no supernatural reality, and there's no duality between the material world and the spiritual world. So if we actually had evidence of a supernature, then it would immediately be part of the natural world. And that is why the word proof struck me as odd, because there can be no good proof that is not rooted in reality and evidence. So, change. What is the natural world? Well, this is not just the material world that we can sense. It's also the microscopic, quantum, and cosmological world that we need scientific instruments to detect or infer. It's also not just the material world of particles and energy. It's also the mental world humans have created, namely language, culture, information stored in our brains, music, science, technology, mathematics, art, and the realm of ideas, whether political, religious, or philosophical. And so you see there, religion in its rightful place. It's just one amongst many sets of ideas that humans have generated. And for naturalists, we rely first on the findings of science and the scientific method to find out about the world. And science uses evidence that can be interpreted. And the evidence are facts that are gathered by senses, our senses, and by our instruments. And there's also a process of getting better and better evidence. And this approach is sometimes called methodological naturalism, which is obviously related to philosophical naturalism. Slide, please. Science, then, does not say that non-natural realms exist, only that they haven't been observed or discovered yet. And the burden of proving supernaturalism is always upon those who claim it exists, which means producing evidence, not just logical arguments to demonstrate it. The existence of a God lacks evidential support, we say, along with jinns, fairies, angels, and shaitan. And we say that these ideas that exist, that these are ideas that exist only in our minds and not in physical reality. And I've yet to see any proof, let alone absolute proof, that a God exists, or indeed that no God exists. But there are some strong probabilities that you can think about, and I'll suggest some later. Science has proved itself enormously successful and reliable, and the understanding of how the brain in particular works has progressed enormously. And we now understand, for instance, that the brain is busy with a myriad of unconscious actions every moment, just a fraction of which our conscious self later notices. We are really what our brain is doing. Slide, please. Now, this is our Imam Darwin. I think he's got the beard, hasn't he? Evolutionary and other scientists have gathered the evidence and developed the probable account of the prehistory of our species. Humans, just as other animals, have emerged from millions of years of natural selection. Under environmental pressures, each species of animal tends to find a niche in the ecosystem where it can survive and reproduce. Speciation and modification of bodies enables animals to handle their eco-niches better. For instance, giraffes that have evolved long necks are able to reach more higher leaves and food. And fish, interestingly enough, that have found caves a good place, dark, lightless caves, a place to thrive, lose the sight of their eyes, because actually eyes are expensive things to maintain and they don't need them. Another slide, please. So our ancestors found a different niche. They developed larger brains to outwit their predators, and over time developed larger brains still. And out of these large brains emerged language, culture, and consciousness. So the story is that about 50,000 years ago, a remarkable change occurred in Homo sapiens. They began to make figurines, they started drawing pictures in caves, and they began to bury their dead with grave goods. These have all been found by archaeologists. Another cave painting was found just last week in Borneo. That's not the one that was found in Borneo, but it's similar. These are 30, 40,000 years old. What changed? Scientists infer that from what has been found, that humans must have developed an intelligence and a language by then that enable them to reflect on their surroundings, to ask questions and tell each other stories. And neurologists tell us that this culture, language, and consciousness, which we alone in the animal kingdom appear to have, are emergent properties. They emerge from the neuronal activity of our brains. There's no evidence of a soul separate from our physical being. And there's especially no evidence of any detached soul or transcendental reality or entity telling the brain what to do. Another, right, thank you. That I should have put on before, but whoop, no, go back. Yeah, that's it. Those are figurines. They're 25, 30, 40,000 years ago, old, and they demonstrate the thinking. There's spiritual thinking going on, if I can say. So what has changed? I've just said that, haven't I? There's no evidence of any detached soul. Another slide, please. So the origins of religion is here, I say. Picture the hunter-gatherers 50,000 years ago huddled around a campfire, perhaps in the mouth of a cave at night, using their newly acquired language and mental skills. What are they going to talk about? Remember, there's no TV. They will have told each other stories. They will have talked about hunting, why things happen, their ancestors, what causes natural phenomena, etc. There are many things they would have talked about, but they would have speculated. One of our basic ideas, inherited from our evolutionary past, is that of agency. We think somebody must have done it, whatever it is that happens to us, when actually sometimes it's the impersonal forces of nature that are responsible for things that happen. And from there, it's a short step to thinking that spirits might be responsible. And that's the origin, we say, and naturalists say, of religious thinking. Anthropologists think that some of the present-day animists, a sort of religion, I don't know if you're familiar with it, in Africa, Siberia, and places like the Amazon and elsewhere, may have preserved something of this old hunter-gatherer religious thinking. Next slide, please. So who said that? Any offers? It was the great and late Christopher Hitchens. It's true. That's our view. Tribes that have been visited by anthropologists have religion, culture, music, dance, art, and stories to tell, which we call myths. And the members of these tribes lived together and must have had rules of conduct for the successful cooperation of their members, just as present-day hunter-gatherer tribes do. Again, selection pressures going back into the mists of our evolutionary history ensure that groups of animals who live together have had standards of conduct, should I say, like empathy and concern for the good of their fellow tribespeople. Our ancestors were not actually the first to evolve it. Their predecessor hominids, their predecessor mammals also had it. This is what scientists conclude, who have observed other species like bonobos. Bonobos, next one. Bonobos appear not to have changed so much as humans since the time our ancestors and their ancestors diverged in evolutionary history about 6 million years ago. They may be amongst our closest cousins, and not just because they spend a lot of time kissing. And there they are kissing. Fast forward 40,000 years or so, and we no longer have small groups of hunter-gatherers, but larger settled societies with kings and pharaohs. And from what historians and archaeologists have discovered, the old polytheistic religions were concerned not with interpersonal morality so much, but actually with propitiating the gods by sacrifice, ritual, and libation, to try to head off things like natural disasters and defeat in war. And these kings and pharaohs assumed a priestly role to lead the efforts of the people, slide please, directed towards pleasing the gods. And there's a picture of Zeus. Now Zeus was around for pretty much as long as Islam's been around, maybe longer, but we no longer believe in him. Well, any here believe in Zeus? No? No, okay. About 5,000 years ago, there was another religious development. The pharaoh declared himself to be God, and therefore entitled to have a glorious afterlife like the other gods. Hence the mummified bodies and the tombs, full of things needed in the afterlife. And the idea seemed to spread rapidly because soon everyone wanted a piece of the action. And from there, how you lived your life in this world began to be associated with religious ideas of what you could expect when you die. Ideas about the afterlife were thus entirely the creation of humans. In Persia, among the Zoroastrians, the idea of paradise and hell developed as a reward or punishment for how you led your life. These ideas were later taken over by Christians and Muslims, and this is then how moral rules entered religion. Before that time, humans behaved morally for natural and social reasons, just as atheists do now. There was and is no need for religious moral rules. So we see precepts in the Bible and in the Quran which combine rules about how you should behave to God with a selection of moral rules appropriate to a primitive society. This is why atheism is not the central tenet of our philosophy. It's actually a footnote, simply the recognition based in scientific and academic expertise that all religion has roots in the myth-making of our remote ancestors, which has been handed down, reformed and embellished to form the religions we still see today, including notably Christianity and Islam, but also other religions. And there have always been, actually, religious reformers, like Jesus and, if he existed, and Muhammad, who have changed religions or started new ones. Think of Mormonism, Buddhism, Baha'is, Jainism, the cargo cults, and since 1950, my particular favorite, the cult of, in Vanuatu, of Prince Philip as a god. I kid you not. There is one of his devotees with two pictures. A religious reform, you might say. Okay, so let's move on in the few minutes I've got left to probabilities. Now, probabilities is the way I offer you to find your way through the net and the mesh of arguments for and against. So I asked the question how you can assess the competing arguments. And I suggest one way is by assessing the probabilities. There's every reason to take the view that the existence of a God, at least of the Abrahamic variety, is improbable. So the Abrahamic God is generally seen as infinite, perfect, all-powerful, all-seeing and knowing, all-loving and compassionate. Now I ask you to compare the world we could expect from such a perfect, all-powerful, all-knowing and seeing and all-loving and compassionate God with the actual world. We would expect such a good and perfect God to create a perfect world, a world without unhappiness, poverty, injustice, sectarianism, war, starvation, climatic degradation, murder, rape, and imperialism. But actually, if there was no such God, the world would simply proceed on natural laws, and we would expect it more probable that all those problems could arise naturally. And that is exactly what we find, a world with unhappiness, poverty, starvation, etc. And we have to struggle for any justice we manage to get. Such a world is more consistent with a naturally developed world. And again, if a God actually wanted to create humans as his special creation, we would expect him to do so by creating just a beautiful place, perhaps like the Garden of Eden, where we had everything we needed and no more. But actually, we see a cosmos full of billions of stars and billions of galaxies. This is more consistent, isn't it, with natural processes in which the Earth and humans play a significant part, which is what cosmologists tell us actually is the case. And if there was a God that was at all concerned with humans, we would expect him to demonstrate his existence clearly to all of us and communicate his love for us clearly in one unified message, communicated unambiguously to all mankind at all times through all media in our own languages, so there was no possible mistake. But if there was no such God, we would expect instead humans to invent their own gods, and that these would be different gods in different places around the world, backed up by different stories, with no agreement about his message, or who God is, or what precepts he and she promulgates. We would see sectarianism, religious wars, inquisitions, and Daesh. And guess what? That's what we see. If there was a God, we would expect him to communicate timeless moral laws to the highest standard right from the start, outlawing slavery, war, persecution and discrimination against minorities, gays, women and apostates. If there was no God, we would expect to see a range of moral laws influenced by the background and culture in which they arose, which actually do change over time. And we have seen slavery, for instance, approved in some religions. It would have been very easy for God to give his creation a clear scientific textbook with all the scientific laws and some useful medical facts like the germ theory of disease. Why didn't he do that? He's not bothered with us if he exists, and he doesn't exist, we say. Finally, if humans were designed by a perfect, all-knowing, powerful God, we would expect him to design a perfect human body. Not one with design flaws or with traces of our evolutionary past, or both. For instance, in the case of the appendix, it serves no human purpose and can explode, causing a major emergency or death. However, in rabbits, it's quite. Is that 1 minute?
1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. In rabbits, it serves a useful purpose. Or, as shown on the slide, thank you. Back, yeah. The narrow pelvic bone, which makes childbirth so difficult, a problem other animals don't have. So what we actually have is an imperfect body with traces of our evolutionary past, not evidence of design by a perfect engineer God. So I ask you to treat these probabilities, think of them cumulatively, and remember it's God we're talking about. He has and had, if he existed, the power to get it right. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy, for your presentation on the non-existence of God. And now for the counter-argument. For the existence of God, I'd like to ask Shaykh Asrar Rashid to present his evidence. You can sit down if you like.
Yeah, please. And do I use the mic?
You can try it.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for your presentation, and this is not the first discussion we've had. In fact, it's the second discussion we've had. Firstly, I would like to address the spectrum of certainty that atheism in reality should be retermed as being agnosticism, because no one would have certainty in the sense that a believer would have certainty regarding the existence of God. A believer would believe in God with all certainty and without any doubt, ostensibly at least with their profession of faith, meaning pronouncing the faith and believing. Inwardly only they would know themselves whether they have 100% certainty or not. So an agnostic or anyone who professes to be an atheist in this day and age or in any time would in fact be an agnostic, someone always who remains in doubt regarding this specific subject. Likewise, there may be certain believers who may profess faith and always suffer from doubts due to the objections that have been presented regarding the existence of God. This argument regarding the existence of God, as the speaker prior to me mentioned, does not only revolve around rational arguments, it also has an historical basis. So what is termed as being humanist philosophy today is not something new for the Muslim world. During the Abbasi period, you had the influx of Greek philosophy entering and infiltrating the Muslim world, and Muslims were exposed to many of these different philosophies, which were then countered by rational theology, and this led to the development of the Ash'ari Kalam methodology, which is a rational theology in order to counter such arguments. At the same time, keeping the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a source of law, but at the same time rationalizing those arguments. Now, one of the major flaws in this argument against the existence of God is conflating religion, organized religion, with belief in God. And this was mentioned by earlier theologians. They mentioned the example of a man living on a mountain who has no outer influence of any religion. Will he believe in a God with his mind? Meaning, looking around him, will he realize that there is a God? We may use the term God loosely, not specific to any type of God, even though, rationally speaking, with a rational argument, a person would believe in a first cause of the universe, that there is a first cause. Whether they term the first cause as being a God or anything else is a point of argument. But that first cause, they would rationalize that this first cause of the universe is in fact eternal, meaning an eternal cause, because if that cause was not eternal, then that would in fact would entail that the cause is contingent, like the very universe that we observe. So the very first cause being eternal was something that could be understood, which some have termed as being natural theology. Natural theology concluding that there is a first cause for the universe, an eternal first cause for the universe, without any recourse to religious literature or to any revealed religion or any organized religion. So confusing organized religion with this belief of God is only because of some historical aspects of the major religions of the world, that they may have persecuted certain groups for their disbelief in God or their disbelief in their specific religion. So my argument today is that God, or the existence of God, again using that term loosely in regard to the first cause of the universe, is correctly used. The rational argument of a God existing is correct simply because, not due to the revealed religions, but because a person who may be isolated and live in an isolated environment can conclude with his mind that there is a God. Now the arguments presented, one of them is regarding metaphysics and the supernatural, that the humanist philosophy would believe that if something is not observable, it does not exist. So this certainty which is concluded that if something is not observable or there is no supernatural event, that thing cannot exist, this certainty can be countered with certain historical events. In Muslim theology, for historical events, there is an exact methodology in determining whether a historical event has occurred or not. So the doubt regarding the existence of Jesus, which was expressed in Islamic methodology, there is something known as ilmul rijal, which is the narrators who narrate such historical events are taken into account, their biographies are taken into account, as well as narrator accreditation and narrator criticism, the truthfulness and the veracity of those narrators. Their biographical works are extant, meaning where their biographies are mentioned and details regarding their personal lives. It is not as vague as Christianity or other religions where names may be mentioned but nothing is known regarding that specific individual. No. In Islam, when a supernatural event, meaning what religion terms as being a miracle, is mentioned, that miracle is documented, and there is a concept known as tawatur, which is mass transmission. Mass transmission would entail that the number of people who relate that event is not one isolated individual or two isolated individuals, but a huge congregation of people, that it would be virtually impossible for all of them to concur on a lie. So if a historical event happened with the Prophet, which reaches us through mutawatir, meaning mass transmission, then we would know for certainty that this historical event occurred. This concept of mass transmission is how our religion has reached us. But like I said, discussing the specifics of a religion and discussing the very existence of a first cause of the universe are two different things. With regard to the point made regarding the existence of non-observable things, I would ask, does love exist? If someone says love does exist, I would say love is not observable. The effects of love are observable. A person may say to his wife, I love you, a woman may say to her husband, I love you, and one human being may say to another human being, I love you. But this concept of love is a concept that we understand that it exists. But if I asked you to show me tangible proof of love, the only thing you would furnish as proof is the effects of love. The effects meaning when a person expresses his love to another person, we know that love exists. But likewise, if someone says God is not observable with our eyes, we cannot observe God in this universe, the response is that who said observation is only through the eyes? Observation could be through the mind and the heart. That a person can know God Almighty rationally, as well as knowing God Almighty with the heart with love for God, and something which is known as ma'rifah, gnosis, knowing God through the heart and the mind. So this argument that we cannot observe God in this universe is a flawed argument which is commonly mentioned, unfortunately. Additional to this, the counter argument regarding the natural origins of religion, some attempt to superimpose a historical account that the origins of religion have their origins in these paintings found in these cave paintings, or in tribal organizations of tribes, and tribes coming together, and people therefore concluding that these tribes must have been the first origin of religion. This, of course, is something inferred from artifacts and from historical, the methodology of archaeologists. But like I said, in Islam, we have the methodology of verification, which is totally different to the method employed in the Anglosphere. In the Muslim world, the theologians would have their own unique method, which is checking the verification of the people who relate the origins of that particular religion. But while on this side we have inferment, and inferment does not lead to certainty regarding the origins of any religion. For instance, in 2,000 years, if the books of Islam remain, people in 2,000 years will still know the origins of particular historical facts relating to Islam, because those books have been preserved and the names of those people who preserved that religion are well known. This methodology differs totally from humanist philosophy. The other counter argument regarding the example given of the giraffes is in fact Lamarckian evolution theory, not Darwinian, the growth of the necks of the giraffes. And we've already discussed evolution theory in depth, and that evolution theory itself does not impart, not in terms of its data, not in terms of scientific data, in terms of the conclusions. And many of the facts relating to Darwinistic interpretation of that data leads to more questions than answers, because of regarding the origins of life and the development of life. Of course, some of the counter arguments that were brought forward was regarding the problem of evil, that if this first cause of the universe does actually exist, then why does he not remove evil and suffering from human beings? In fact, if we look at majority of the evil and suffering that does occur in the universe and counterbalance that with the amount of what we know as Muslims, which is known as afiyah, which is well-being, if we counterbalance both of them, we will observe that well-being of human beings outweighs the other disasters that may occur. Additional to that, the world is not perfect. Why? Because God created this world in the way it is with His divine will, meaning God did not intend this world to be a perfect world. This is what Islamic theology tells us. If this world was perfect, we would not want to leave this world at the time of death, meaning at the time of the death, we would want to stay in this world, and this world would be an abode to stay in forever. But what was mentioned with regard to the Abrahamic faiths and the God mentioned in the Abrahamic faiths being all loving, this is not found in Islam. One of the names of God is the loving, but there are other names for God also, like Al-Qahhar, the compelling. Like He has the name Ar-Rafi', the one who raises, but He also has the name Al-Khafid, the one who lowers and humbles. So the manifestations of God's attributes are many, meaning God does not have the divine attributes of God are multiple, are endless and are eternal. The manifestation of those attributes is seen in everything around us and observed in the creation around us. So the problem of evil, of course, where people mention human suffering, if you counter human suffering with human well-being, human suffering is less than the amount of human well-being that we have. What does this lead us into understanding the purpose of creation? The purpose of creation, of course, there are many questions that can be asked in the questions and answers regarding the purpose of creation and why God created us. But one of the main purposes is something, the concept known as ubudiyah. What is ubudiyah? Ubudiyah is recognizing your innate neediness to your creator. Every human being is born with this servitude to his creator, irrelevant to religion. Meaning, conflating this with organized religion is a misnomer. What is correct is understanding that when we are born, we realize that our immune system, our mind, our heart, our eyes, everything that works within us was not created by us, but was created by someone else. Submitting to that is the concept of ubudiyah, servitude to the one who has created that. And this is the innate recognition of a creator, meaning every child when he is born and when every adult, once he has grown up into adulthood, recognizing that innately is what is called belief in God. Whether a person accepts Islam or a specific religion, this is an additional thing. But the rejection of this concept of ubudiyah, servitude to the one who has made you, who keeps your mind working, who keeps your eyes working, servitude to him is something innate in every human being. Some of them may deny this, but or say this is a produce of evolution, and over millions of years of evolution, this is because what neo-Darwinism does is interpret every phenomenon, human phenomenon, in the light of the Darwinian evolution, which is incorrect, meaning even psychology is interpreted in the light of Darwinian evolution. Likewise, the origins of religion is interpreted in the light of Darwinian evolution. But this concept of ubudiyah is something which is one of the purpose of why God Almighty created us. What was mentioned regarding the vestigial organs? Initially, in the early 1900s, when Darwinian evolution was fairly new, now we have neo-evolution, but in that time it was more Darwinian. In the early 1900s, the Darwinians, they listed multiple vestigial organs. This is, if you look and check, they listed multiple vestigial organs. Later on, those vestigial organs were reduced over time when medicine advanced and they realized the use of those specific things. So now we are limited to maybe the appendix or something else, but the list has gone down. The example of pointing out these observable things which a person is unable to understand is the example of a man who enters a building. When he sees everything, meaning the design within that building, he may observe something which he does not understand the use of, like a nail which is hammered into the wall, and he will say, this nail is hammered into the wall without any obvious use. Therefore, the entire building has no use. Or may point out a few things which he may deem as being a flaw in that building, which have no use, and then conclude that the entire building has no use. This is ignoring the perfect design of the universe, perfect design in the sense that it is right for life. It does not mean that it negates suffering. It does not mean that there is no bloodshed. It does not mean that there is no disease, because if human beings had no disease, then we would have more the likes of Pharaoh. Pharaoh only claimed to be God. They mention in the historical religious sources, he only claimed to be God because he never suffered from any disease. His arrogance overcame him, and then he claimed to be God Almighty. If he had suffered from a disease or some type of evil, he would have realized his own human weakness. Recognizing this human weakness and submitting to the one who created you is known as ubudiyah, servitude. And this is the call of natural theology, servitude to the one who created you. Innate rejection of this is what is called disbelief. So Christopher Hitchens was cited, he famously has said that if he saw God Almighty and God Almighty did exist, he would still reject him. This is the very essence of disbelief, meaning, or what Stephen Fry said, that if he does exist, then he would reject him entirely for creating the likes of diseases like the likes of cancer. Now, this rejection is innate disbelief. Accepting this creator is known as ubudiyya, servitude, and this is what makes the distinction between a theist and an atheist. Of course, the main three reasons why people may reject organized religion, even though they will conflate organized religion with existence of God, because a person can believe in the existence of God and not ascribe to any organized religion, but will sum into three things. One is this question regarding the problem of evil, that they will bring up some event in their life or in the lives of others and mention that if God existed and he was an all-loving God, then why would he create evil? The second reason would be science, seeing a contradiction of science. Now, the question that was posed, why doesn't God reveal himself in Revelation? Of course, as Muslims, we would say he has, but why isn't the Quran a book of science? The response to that is because God has ennobled the son of Adam, meaning human beings, to do that research for themselves, that human beings have the ability to make scientific progress for themselves. If God reveals science in the Quran, meaning as a textbook of science, this would mean that human beings themselves are unable to make scientific discoveries for themselves. So that task was left for human beings. And the third and last reason why people may reject God is organized religion and the laws and prescriptions that come with organized religion. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. We've heard presentations from both of our debaters on the existence of God and the non-existence of God, and both of them stuck perfectly to their time limits. So we've started as hopefully we mean to carry on. And now the floor is open. We've got exactly 1 hour. It's 7:21 and we've got till about 8:20 to take your questions and to hear the answers from our debaters. I'm going to try to be fair, so I'll try to pick from across the hall. And also, I'd like to give equal opportunity for those who have religion and those who don't have religion. So I want to make sure that everybody gets equal chance to speak. So as we had the non-existence of God as the first presentation, we'll start with somebody who on the opposite side for the first question. So somebody of religion who wants to ask the first question, raise your hands up. Okay. Brother, do you want to just come down to the end? And anybody on the other side of the argument, so non-religion, wants to ask a question. All right. So if you just go there for the next question. Thank you.
My question is directed to Guy Otten. I don't know much about humanism, but I know that you believe that your own moral code is supposed to be guided by what humans think is moral by consensus. But as we know, this doesn't always work. An extreme example of this would be Nazi Germany. Or we see around the world right now, there's a lot of hatred for certain groups of people. And the human morality isn't always unflawed. So a consensus of what humans believe is moral isn't always the best way to guide your life. So what would be your response to that as a humanist?
Thank you for that question. Yep. I've got to say that I prefer humanist morality, secular morality, based on human rights and respect for people and equality, to the morality of both the Bible and the Quran, which permits slavery, which provides for the stoning and persecution of gays and apostates, which treats women as second-class citizens, and throughout the Quran you'll see degradation of non-believers throughout. Almost in every surah you'll find it. And I find that morally unacceptable. Humanist morality is based on human values. And we share as I mentioned in my talk briefly, common human values based on compassion, because we are social animals. And out of that, we have to develop consensus and intersubjectivity, is the word is often used. It's not objective in the religious sense, but it is objective in the sense that we can't just choose our own. We have to live in a society with common standards. And we see that all over the world working quite well. Of course there are things that go wrong. Hitler was a Catholic, but he had his own religion. He worshipped himself. That's my view of it. I think Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao Zedong probably as well. So that's my answer there.
I'll let the Shaykh respond, and any questions that direct him, I'll let you respond to them as well.
Just a correction to that. Stoning is not found in the Quran. Killing of the apostate is not found in the Quran. And additional to that, slavery is not endorsed by the Quran. The verses relating to slavery that are revealed in the Quran were there to give human rights to slaves that were already existing in the Arabian Peninsula. So the Quran did not legislate slavery. The Quran, in fact, in the books, the books of jurisprudence of Islam, you find chapters on freeing slaves, but you find not a single chapter on capturing slaves. So this is something that needs to be corrected. The stoning and the killing of the apostate is found in hadith literature and in the books of jurisprudence. There's no denial of that being found, but a person should be precise when quoting from, meaning if I quoted anything from humanist philosophy, I should be precise in how I quote humanist philosophy. But with regard to morality, we would say God is the one who determines, meaning through divine revelation. If there was no divine revelation, then humans are not tasked to follow any divine revelation. So if someone believes there is a God but there is no divine revelation, they are not obliged to follow that revelation. But once they recognize that there is a revelation, then God is the one who determines human morality, what is permitted and what is not permitted. And this is how we would also define evil, meaning even evil is defined by the divine, meaning humans cannot, because otherwise a one-way road in certain cultures may be deemed as good and in others it would be deemed as bad. But who gives the final say would be the divine.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a question there. Is there anybody from a religious perspective who wants to ask a question afterwards? We'll take this question after that one.
I have a few possible, but I'll go with this one. You ascribe emotional responses, this is a question for the Shaykh. You ascribe emotional responses to your brain and your heart. You say you believe in God with your brain and in your heart. How can you ascribe an emotional response to the heart when it's proven it's just a muscle pump to pump blood around the body? You can have a heart transplant and get somebody else's heart. Your thoughts and feelings wouldn't be the same. Humans have ascribed feelings to the heart because it is, a source of life in the body because it pumps blood. But you could just as easily ascribe emotions to your spleen or your kidneys or your liver because they perform life-sustaining functions. The brain is where the thoughts live and the ideations live. But so the notion that someone can believe something in their heart is just fallacious in its entirety.
Okay, the response to your question is, I did not say belief is known through the heart, I said knowing is through the heart. Now this is a way of stating something like if when you say, I had this feeling in my stomach. Why do we say I had this feeling in my stomach? Because when a person says, I feel this in my stomach, when you feel nervous, where do you get the feelings? In your stomach. So if a person feels nervous, they will feel that in their stomach. Likewise, if someone has love, where will those feelings transpire aside from the brain? This does not negate the brain. They will feel that love where in the heart. The heart may start beating fast. This is not deniable. Meaning, when you have certain feelings, the heart may start palpitating and you'll feel that in the heart, irrelevant to whether you've had a heart transplant or not. So when we say we feel love for God or anything else, that feeling of love is felt in the heart also. I'm not saying that the heart is a rational organ that you rationalize with the heart. No, I said you know with the mind and you know with the heart. So knowing with the mind goes hand in hand with knowing with the heart. You cannot separate the two.
We'll
But
get into-
even though it may be a interpretation of physiological responses, the feeling is felt in that particular organ, and this is human perception that many people cannot deny.
I'm going to let Guy respond to that, but just before I do, a question from a non-religious perspective. Do we have any? All right, you had a question, didn't you? So we'll come to you. We'll come to you next. Let's just get the response, and then we'll come to you.
I think the question about love and emotions was first raised by my learned friend Asrar, in response to my suggestion that that the natural world was all that we could understand and observe. And in fact, I think he's answered that point at all. He was suggesting that love is something you can't see or sense. He's just said you can feel the blood pumping through your heart. So therefore, love, together with all the other emotions, are part of the natural world that we can understand and sense. Thank you.
You can use that. Okay. Yeah, we'll take the question here.
It's about the morality. We looked at 30 years ago in the UK, Margaret Thatcher cracked down on homosexuality. Why is it widely endorsed now today, and what's changed? And what stops incest and bestiality in the future being morally acceptable? And the main question actually to both speakers is what makes most sense of the origin of the universe? What caused the first cause? I think that's the biggest question, because what caused the universe to exist? You know, why are we here today? How did we come about? So.
Okay, so the first one was around moral compasses changing over time, and the second one on first cause. So we'll kick off with you guys.
Yes, I think that our awareness of moral standards has improved over the last 30, 40, 50 years. That is my answer to that. And I actually think that that is progress. We now have a commitment to the equality, sexual and gender and equality with minorities and people with disability. This is a great step forward. So I have no problem with that.
So is incest acceptable?
No, no. Why should it be? It's nothing to do with incest. We're talking about equality. The fact that the limits of any moral changes are those that are agreed and acceptable to a society. Now, it so happens that the Pharaoh did actually marry his sister, I believe. So, you know, it's not as if it's unknown. But in our society, we don't find that moral, and I don't see a problem with that. Shall I go on to the first
you can
cause?
answer the second one as well.
Now, I mean, the first cause is the old bogeyman, isn't it? We don't know. That is to say, human beings do not know how the Big Bang started, because because our scientific knowledge gives out at the point of the Big Bang. And therefore, to suggest that therefore God is an argument for ignorance. It's an argument from ignorance to actually go that far. We have to be honest and say we do not know, and it's wrong to guess.
What caused the first cause?
I've just answered that question. We do not know. How? Those are very simple, very simple words. Do you understand them? We do not know, and it's wrong to try and guess.
Okay, let's see if Shaykh Asrar can tell me.
Okay, with regard to the first question regarding ethics and morality, with Islamic revealed law, with the revealed law, with the revealed law, Islamic law, the certain moral and ethics would stay the same, irrelevant to what age and time you may live in. So murder is wrong at all times. Likewise, rape is wrong at all times. Incest would be wrong at all times. So it's fixated. So we do not have a problem with that particular question. With regard to the next question, the first cause, without going on to God, because making the jump to God would entail a different set of arguments. We would need a different set of arguments to say a God with X, Y, and Z attributes. But that first cause, having a cause, would mean that that cause would also have a cause, and this would lead ad infinitum to an
Regression.
endless regression of causes. So we would have to stop at a point that the first cause would have to be an eternal cause, an uncaused cause, meaning that's the only way you stop the regression.
Okay, we've got a question here. If you wouldn't mind just coming down to the end so the volunteer can hold the mic. Do we have another question after this one? Yeah, Hamza, if you just want to come down here. And I'll come to you in a second.
Can you explain the rules again for the later comments?
Okay, just a reminder of the house rules before we take this question. So the questions, the rules relating to the questions. Please only ask questions, don't make speeches. Keep them short and keep them to the point, and please ask questions which are related to the topics that have been discussed this evening. And audience members may ask a maximum of one question each per debater. Okay.
So, Asrar mentioned about just then, murder is wrong at all times. And you were talking about why is the world in a bad state. So I kind of want to make a quick comment then. It's quite a question. So the reason, obviously in our faith, being a Christian, why we believe the world is in its state is because the Lord gave the earth as a dominion to mankind for them to reign and to take care of it. He gave us free will, and it's from our it's from our choices that we've basically brought in, bad things into the world.
And now the question, please.
Yeah, so the question is, so you mentioned murder is wrong at all times, but if you go to Surah Al-Ma'idah, right, it says here in verse 32, and now this is, it says, for that cause we decreed for the children of Israel that so whoever killeth a human being for other than manslaughter or corruption in the earth, it shall be if they've killed all of mankind, and who save one the life, they've saved all of mankind. Now that was ordained to the children of Israel, which are the Jews. And then if you read the next verse after that, the question's here now. So the next verse, 33, says, the only reward of those who make war upon Allah and His Messenger and strive of corruption in the land, there will be that they should be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet and alternate sides cut off or will be expelled out of the land. It says, such will be their degradation in the world, and in the hereafter theirs be an awful doom. So after you've made that comment that murders is wrong all the time, what would your comment be about this here?
My response to you, that verse is in reference to legislation for rulers, that when that particular verse that you mentioned is regarding highway robbers and thieves, and the revelation of that verse was in light of that when they robbed certain sheep herders and they killed them and crucified them, then they were punished with the similar type of punishment for the government to carry out. This is a legislation for governments to stop murder. So because the children of Israel were given the law that a life for a life, the rulers were given the permission to take away the life of anyone who may have murdered. So capital punishment, that is the purpose of that particular verse.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I mean, what's interesting about the Ten Commandments is, of course, we have thou shalt not kill, which is actually, it doesn't say thou shalt not commit murder, it just says thou shalt not kill, which sounds like an absolute prohibition. And yet, within a few verses or chapters, God is sending the children of Israel out to murder other tribes and other people.
But with regard to that guy, even with the Bible, and I believe you're Christian, even with the Bible needs to be taken in context with other verses. So God will say in the Bible, thou shalt not kill, but revelation would be sent to certain prophets that they were permitted to kill in certain instances in warfare. So the thou shalt not kill would, the exact meaning of thou shalt not kill would mean that thou shalt not kill unjustly. This is not my defense of the particular Bible.
I thought it was. I was enjoying this.
But hermeneutics,
the Christians and the Muslims ganging up together.
The hermeneutics of reading any text, like in the Bible in Kings, there is a mention regarding the children of Israel. God says to them, you shall be cursed in the desert and you shall eat from excrement. And people quote this to say, look, God is ordering them to eat excrement. But when you check Bible commentaries, the correct meaning of that is that when they were in the wild, they were forced to burn as fuel the dung of camels, and they would burn that as fuel, and they would make their food on that fuel. So if I were to quote that to a Christian priest, it would be totally out of context. So likewise, the verse that you mentioned is in reference to the rulers, that the rulers were permitted to kill highway bandits who had murdered. Likewise, the verse in the Quran which mentions amputation of the hand, that is an address to the rulers, not to everyone else.
Not now. We've got other questions that are, so we'll go there. The brother in the blue shirt after we take the question from here.
And there's
Somebody had a
a
question?
non-religious one
Yes,
over there.
I'll come there in a
that lady.
second. Somebody here have a question? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Jazakallah khair for attending. And this question is directed to a guy, obviously. I've just walked in late, unfortunately, but I've walked into you quoting verses of the Quran, not even giving the reference, which I find extremely unacademic for somebody academic. So I wanted to know, what are your credentials when it comes to Islam? Have you studied Sarf, Nahu, Balagha, Mantiq, any of the sciences that I've just mentioned? And as you know, for someone academic, you're saying that the Quran states that, we treat women as second-class citizens, which I find offensive. You have no reference for that. So what is your epistemology when it comes to Islam? Because the epistemology for us is certainty, yet you're not even certain about your narrative of Islam, let alone atheism. So where do you take your narrative from when it comes to quoting Islam? And for Shaykh Asrar, the question would be, is that do you feel that studying Ilm al-Kalam gives you a firm enough grounding to tackle atheism? Just to sort of ask you both that question as well, in my own way.
Yeah, you're probably right in that I have made generalized statements about Islam, which may well have come from the Hadith rather than the Quran, and I accept that criticism. But the other point you've made is about certainty, and I think this is more interesting, because there was a guy called Plato who came up with a heresy called ideals and absolutes. He is responsible for a lot of this mischief. He came up with the idea that there is such a thing as an absolute, perfect God or perfect person, perfect chair. Those are his ideas, and those ideas were so brilliant that the Christians took them up and said, oh yeah, that's God, perfect, yeah. And later on, you Muslims have done the same. It is in fact a heresy in the sense it's a flawed approach to reality. There's no such thing as anything that is perfect. Not even your most beloved girlfriend. There isn't such a thing. If you think anything is perfect, love or truth or anything, you're already going, or certainty, you're already off the rails. We have to live with probabilities. We have to try and get to truth as far as we can, building on evidence and facts and assessments. That is a very interesting question, so thank you for that one. The other one, you're right.
We all switched off when you said
Have you ever heard
girlfriends.
of a perfect cup of tea?
No.
Do you want to just, the brother mentioned Ilm al-Kalam, do you want to just mention what that is in response
With
to?
regard to Ilm al-Kalam is rational theology which developed in in fact, in the first 100 years of Islam, and further developed over in the second 200 years of Islam, when Greek philosophy entered the Muslim world and Muslim theologians would defend the Quran with the rational basis. What you mentioned regarding Christianity having its roots in Greek philosophy, I would totally disagree with that, because Jesus, whether you read Jesus through the Quran or whether you read Jesus through the New Testament, you will find that Jesus' teachings, and in fact the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, you can buy the Bible with the red text for the speech of Jesus. You will find that Jesus' teachings actually do not have any rooting in Greek philosophy. In fact, they are totally distinct, even though Muslims have their disputes with Christians with regard to the non-tampering of the Bible, but the words of Jesus, you will find they have no root in Greek philosophy. So that would be, I would totally disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take that question there, and then the lady here. Do we have another question on this side? Okay, brother in the white shirt, and then we'll come to gentleman in the middle. There first, yeah.
It's just a question to Guy Otto. My question's partially answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway, not to both. if living in a probability that God exists or doesn't exist is basically what an atheist does, then do you not live your life in partial uncertainty? Live and die your whole life and all your kids' life and all their lives in partial uncertainty, or what's the purpose of life? And to Shaykh Asrar, can you elaborate more on how certain you are about Islam?
Okay, purpose of life.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and actually critical question. I think this is at the centre of the difference in our worldviews. And that is that, yes, we do live all our lives, I submit, in uncertainty. We don't know whether we're going to be able to cross that road safely. We don't know whether we're going to get full marks in an exam. We do our best all the time. Everything is an effort to try and achieve a standard that's good enough, at least. That is the reality in science as well. Science is not an absolute system. It's a system that gathers the evidence, interprets it, and sometimes gets it wrong and has to revisit that and try again. But nevertheless, it has achieved over 500 plus years enormous results.
2 plus 2 will always be 4.
2 plus mathematics is the creation of the human mind, like God. You know, you can have perfections and you can have absolutes in an invented world, right? Not in the real world. That's the point.
All right.
So the Earth going around the Sun is a certain fact, is it not? Meaning we would have certainty regarding the Earth going around the Sun, even though it's a scientific fact.
Yes, but the point there is that it will not necessarily always do that, and every year apparently it moves slightly.
But like you mentioned,
it's not certain, it's not fixed in accordance with what I understand to be the Islamic tradition, which is that the sun is fixed in its course. It's not. It moves.
That again.
In fact, the whole solar system.
The
is
Islamic
moving.
tradition doesn't have anything specific to say regarding that. The Quran itself could be interpreted in multiple ways.
I seem to recall reading a surah where it suggests that the sun is fixed in its course.
In its course, but it's interpreted in multiple ways.
But everything's interpreted.
But here, the point you mentioned regarding 2 plus 2 being 4 always as a fact has an external reality as well, because if we have one bottle of water here, one here, and one here, it makes 3 bottles of water, and with certainty I can say that there are 3 bottles of water in front of me. So
yeah, but that is a language that we've invented to describe reality. It's not reality itself.
So saying God would be a language to describe a reality of a first cause. So the first cause...
This is where I agree with you. God is a language.
So if we say the first cause is God, you would accept that?
I would accept that that's a language, that's a description that you've given
to the first cause,
to an idea. My point, as I've said to that gentleman over there, we do not know how the cosmos started. And that is where we, humanists and naturalists, end the discussion until such time as we've got evidence as to what happened. And to have language and ideas and concepts floating around in your mind, mental gymnastics, is not going to get us to the truth. We need evidence.
With that regard, if you passed, for instance, a city which had crosses and crucifix, you'll know that the majority of the people living in this city are Christians, meaning it's an inferred argument. Circumstantial evidence would lead to a certainty regarding the residence of that town. Likewise, we would say circumstantial evidence would lead to the fact, and answering your question as well, the fact that we see the observed universe and the contingent nature of the observed universe would tell us regarding that the universe has a first cause which is eternal. So with regard to your question on how certain I am regarding Islam, I would say 100% certain, because as a Muslim, I objectively look at the Quran, understood the Quran, and then objectively looked at the biography of the Prophet and looked at the objections as well. So many of these objections, in fact, overwhelming majority of these objections I have come across and have answered in a rational way, or have read the answers in a rational way.
Right, we'll take the question from the lady there.
Part of your argument for the existence of God, you said it was the balance of well-being versus suffering, and that well-being is, takes priority over suffering, and there's more evidence for well-being. But what are you basing that statistic on? Because when you look at certain parts of the world, or even sections of our own society, there's tremendous suffering. So the balance would be more towards suffering than well-being.
With regard to your question on suffering, if those sections of society that we may observe that are suffering, most of the time you will observe that that suffering is due to human causes, meaning human beings will be behind the economic suffering of certain groups. You will notice that one nation may plunder another nation and take all its wealth away. For instance, tomorrow I'm going to Africa, to Malawi and to South Africa. These are two nations that were plundered by human beings. Prior to that, those nations were prosperous nations. But so a lot of that suffering that's occurring in South Africa and Malawi is down to human endeavors. So that cannot be, we cannot place that suffering on the shoulders of anything else except human beings. So human beings need to take.
That showed that God did exist because it was more geared towards the well-being. You said that there was more well-being than there was suffering. So that was your example of why God.
If you look at someone's natural existence, and if they were left without any human hindering in their lives, majority of the people, for the majority of their time in their lives, will have happiness compared to sadness, meaning God created sadness without any human acquisition of that. You will notice that majority of the time they will have happiness, but humans tend to have a short memory of regarding their happy time. So if they have 300 days of happiness and 5 days of sadness, those 5 days of sadness will overwhelm the 300 days of happiness. So they will reflect over those 5 days, but they will forget the 300 days of happiness that they may have had.
It's nothing to do with God then.
I would say God does create that sadness, but how much thankfulness do we have for those 300 days? Meaning, do we ever acknowledge Him? People reject Him.
Thank God for the good times, but you don't do anything about the sad times.
No, you turn to Him in the sad times.
What, He's not going to help?
He does help. Why doesn't He help?
Because you've just
I'm gonna let Guy respond to this if he wants to, and then we'll take the next question.
No, I don't think I need to say anything more
They
than
can carry on, and
the
if they
lady
want.
has said.
I'm going to move on to the next question. Gentleman in the white here. Yeah, I'm coming. Yeah, after this one, I'm coming to you. Yeah. I've got one there, and then you. Yeah. Yes.
So my question's to both speakers. Firstly to Guy. What keeps us, what makes, so I'm not really too happy with that don't know reality of existing. I mean, surely in your mind, doesn't the question ever come, there's generations and generations of people that have arrived before us. People come and go. I mean, we will die. It's a certainty. That's also another certainty. Everyone will die. So why is this all happening? I mean, saying you don't know doesn't stop the reality of dying. So can you please explain explicitly what you mean by don't know? Because in itself it's a truth statement. You're making a truth statement to say that that's what we should do. Okay. So essentially you've made your own sort of religion. So please explain that, because it hasn't been elaborated well enough. And Shaykh, if you could explain more, also what is our purpose of existence?
Okay. Do you want to kick off?
No.
All right, Guy.
So, not knowing is actually what I would, recognizing that we do not know things that we don't know is what I call atheist spirituality. It's the first time these people have heard that word. Let me explain why.
Sufism for atheists.
It's because it requires the humility to adjust to the reality that we are an insignificant speck in Earth and in the solar system, and even more insignificant in the cosmos. That takes a spirituality, it takes a stoicism and an adjustment to reality. It's difficult if you're brought up with certainties. Oh yes, this is the answer to that, that's the answer to the other, even though those certainties are not true. So that is that point there. What is actually why you want me to explain death? That is a natural phenomenon. We all are going to die. Well, actually, some of you may not, because it turns out that scientists possibly have discovered how to keep people young and beautiful throughout their lives. And you may be you may be the first generation to benefit. I'll be dead. But it's something we have to accept. And again, good old atheist spirituality comes in. There's a lovely book by André Comte Sponville called The Little Book of Atheist Spirituality. I recommend it. It really is spot on.
But how can we have spirituality without a spirit?
Thank you very much. Great question. Depends how you define spirit, isn't it, and spirituality. I don't define spirituality in any transcendental sense. I define it as something which is uniquely and above the level of normal human interaction, something rather special and a bit of an achievement in terms of feeling and intellectual understanding. That is how I would describe it.
Okay.
And can I just mention on the purpose? Because obviously, from a religious point of view, you will inevitably see your purpose in life, perhaps influenced by or dictated by the ideas of your religion. But for us, humanists and atheists and naturalists, we don't see it that way. We see purpose as something we find for ourselves, create for our own lives. Thank you.
Okay.
With regard to scientists discovering the secret, the elixir of eternal life or youthfulness, the Quran challenges this and tells us, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ, every soul shall taste death. And the second one, وَمَنْ نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسُ فِي الْخَلْقِ, regarding old age. These are two things that science can never overcome, and the challenge of the Quran remains in that regard. Also, a third challenge of the Quran for humans is creating something out of total nothingness. This is impossible. Meaning, even genetic engineering would involve taking an extract from something else and then adding onto that or doing something with that. But making something from nothingness would be totally impossible. There are certain challenges of the Quran which still have been not met. But your question regarding the purpose of life, I would say the purpose of my life would be to recognize my innate neediness to the one who created me. This is the purpose of my life.
Okay, we'll take that question there.
So for the, when talking about naturalism, an argument against God, you said, was it's improbable because God's omniqualities. And would you say it's still improbable for an apathetic, imperfect creator God? How would you argue against that?
No, you're absolutely right. The facts of the world that we experience would support potentially gods other than the perfect Abrahamic type God. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, great.
But that's not the debate we're having tonight. I mean, tomorrow night you may have a debate with some pagans or something like that.
But how
that
would
would be an interesting discussion.
How would you define perfection? Meaning, if we say God is perfect or imperfect, the very definition of perfect or imperfect would be a human definition. And by innateness, it would be imperfect in itself. Meaning, because human beings are so imperfect, their definition of perfection would be imperfect.
I agree. I like it. But there you have the mental gymnastics and hermeneutics that lead you, all you good Muslim folk, to accept what for the rest of us is a rather weird belief system.
I think we do also have people of other faiths as well as the Muslims. But yeah, do you want to just answer?
Yeah,
Just go a very quick question.
And when you said well-being versus, weighing well-being against suffering in the world, if currently well-being outweighs suffering, could you argue that? And before you said how suffering is caused by humans, so if we go back to hunter-gatherer, where we had a much shorter life expectancy, would you say...
How would we know that we had much shorter life expectancy? How would you know that?
I couldn't say, but I'll take that. In hunter-gatherer societies where it would just be the...
Again, how would you know this? I'm sorry to interject, but in hunter-gathering societies, much of what we know is circumstantial inference of archaeologists and what they tell us, meaning even some of these caveman pictures that they draw in biology books do not impart any type of certainty of what we know of our history. In reality, we don't know much of our history except through written records that have reached us through mass transmission.
I could rephrase it then to a simple one. Would you say that well-being is always outweighed suffering?
Okay. Thanks for asking that question, because it relates to the question that you asked earlier with well-being and suffering. No, well-being does not always outweigh suffering. That is correct. But suffering and what we define as evil relates to God creating evil. Now, we accept God creates evil. This is the distinction between Islam and other religions. We say God creates evil. But one of my responses was that well-being for many people, majority of the times, outweighs suffering. But is it the only response? The answer is no. There are many other responses. For instance, God creates suffering for some people in order that they do not become arrogant in their ways. But does that apply to everyone? The answer is no. The imperfections of the world are there so we do not become attached to the world when we leave the world at the time of death. Imagine you lived a life like Bill Gates, and at the time of death, you would not want to leave the world because of its perfection ostensibly for you. Likewise, it's unfair to judge God, like I said, with our imperfect minds, prior to looking at the entire picture. So the entire picture would mean looking at the Day of Judgment, looking at the hereafter, because God, meaning if someone accepts divine revelation, they would know God promises reward and punishment and fairness on the Day of Judgment. So the full picture of anything we observe on earth would be the full picture in the hereafter. Meaning if someone believes in the hereafter, they would know there is a full picture which God knows and we do not know. Likewise, there is wisdom behind the divine actions of God. So the divine actions relating to evil and suffering, or relating to any disasters or diseases and pestilence that we observe on earth, we would have to look at the entire picture. And that would lead us back to recognizing our imperfection of not understanding the entire picture and not understanding the divine knowledge of God.
Okay, just to say, I'm going to let you respond.
No.
We've just gone past 8 o'clock, so we've only got about 20 minutes left, and I've got at least about 7 people who want to speak, and I'm sure there'll be more. So for the questions that are to come up, please keep them very, very brief so we can get as many in as possible.
Thank you very much. We accept God creates evil and suffering. Wow. Thank you very much for that concession. Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens are right then in remonstrating with God for the damage and evil and suffering he's put in. And I love the get out of jail free card that my friend Asrar has. It's unfair to judge God with our imperfect minds. There's no way we can win, because you've always got your get out of jail card free. So that's my response there.
Okay. Question there. I've got most of the questions are on this side, and I know there's someone there, so let's deal with these and then we'll come over. Yeah.
This question's towards Guy. It's based on the assumption that you've said that you can't really have any certainty regarding anything in the real world completely. Am I correct in assuming that first, before?
Just ask the
question. The question is basically like, if you can't have certainty that anything is fully the way it is in the real world, I know I exist, but I don't really understand. Although I can see everyone, I can't be certain that they have like a cognitive ability. How would you be able to draw all the, the historical arguments and the archaeological arguments about, like, how would you be so certain on the conclusions you can draw for them if you can't be certain on their backing or how they existed in the real world in the first place?
Yep.
Like, how would you draw those arguments without that certainty?
Good question, yeah. We have to go on probabilities. We can be almost certain about a lot of things because evidence is accumulated such that, and also simple things, like the fact that there are 2 bottles, 3 bottles on the table. But for more complicated things, we depend on evidence, we depend on models to interpret that evidence, and we can never really be fully certain, although for some scientific theories we're as near to certain as possible. Evolution is actually one of them. So that is the way we can actually proceed to draw conclusions based on as good as we can get it. That is the honest and correct and real way forward. Not to claim certainties about mental ideas such as religion.
Okay, do you want to respond to that?
With regard to God creating evil, there is no actual admittance on my part because it's known that from Quranic sources as well as the Hadith that the Quran states very clearly that God creates evil. But what I would say in regard to what you mentioned regarding evil is that evil is, how do we define evil may differ from one place to another. With regard to your question on certainty, in Islamic epistemology we would have methods of ascertaining certainty. So because we have methods of ascertaining certainty, for instance what we perceive with our 5 senses would impart certainty, as well as mass transmission imparts certainty, as well as other proofs would impart certainty. So therefore our conclusions would be certain also.
Okay, the lady here.
I want to say a big thank you to both of you, for everyone, for organizing this. I also thank you for the opportunity to ask my question. I'll try and make it brief. The first thing I want to say is when I walked in here, you said that about the origin and things. I want to ask, your glasses, someone made them, your clothes, someone made them. These books, these papers, these colors, they didn't just fall and just come together and work perfectly. And even if you say perfectly, my question is...
Could you slow down? I'm finding it hard to follow you.
What I'm saying is, everything, this scarf, this phone, this mic, because of how it works, because of the whole thing, the thing it serves, even the opposable thumb, it shows intelligent design. So when you say that, oh, we look into creation and we don't know, I really respect that. That's wisdom and humility. Because what you don't know, we call God. And my question to you is it possible that in all your knowledge, you might be about 64, or I don't know how old you are.
I'm 71.
Oh, you look very good. Well done. Honestly, really good. I thought you were 64. Anyways, but is it possible?
Can I have that in writing?
But is it possible that in everything you know, in all your knowledge, all your study, is it possible that you have missed somehow knowing God? Because I have a question. Do you know how many waves are here? How many? Everybody has a phone, right?
Can you just ask the question?
So the question is it possible you've missed God in all your knowing? Because there are things that you don't know. You don't know. I can't see germs, does not mean they don't exist. I must not see them or prove them through scientific methods. Okay. And to you, thank you also for your warmth and everything. But my question to you is, you talked about history. And you said that, unlike Christianity, I would have asked anything if you didn't mention this. You said, my question to you is, one person I believe got the thing, your Quran, and then compared to 40 people who eyewitness accounts, they've been proved in today's times by the top psychologists, whatever panel. How can you then say that based on this, your methodology of verification, you can believe one person's report, and you said that it's been passed down from, have you heard of Chinese whispers? My question is, how valid is what you said about the
what was your 40 eyewitnesses for what?
The Bible.
For the Bible, and one witness for?
One person, I believe,
Quran.
got the Quran, right?
Okay.
But 40 people, over 40 people, over
the New
thousands
Testament
of
or
years,
the Old?
Both of them together, because
there's
they're
more
both
than 40.
Thank you. But if all of them are saying one thing about the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of God, that's compared to one person.
But the Old Testament doesn't mention
He does. Isaiah
Okay,
talks
we're gonna
about
have
this.
to end this one here.
Thank you so much for your time. Anyway, I hope you got the question. I want to
We've got the
respond.
question.
Thank
We've
you.
got the energy.
I picked up 3 questions from that.
Just sum it up into one answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, have I missed anything? Have I missed God in all my knowings? I was brought up as a Catholic, and then I became a Quaker in my 20s, and it's only about 25 years ago that I actually came to the conclusion there was not sufficient evidence for me to believe in God. After a load of Bible study, I might add.
You needed Islamic theology.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Since then, I have read the Quran and quite a lot of Hadith, and been as pretty much horrified as I was when I read the Bible. Now, what you don't know we call God, you said. Yeah, that's it. Is the argument from ignorance. We do not name anything because we don't know it. That's an argument for ignorance. Okay. Intelligent design, finally. First, you've got to prove that a God exists before you can start, trying to suggest that that God may have designed something. Look up human design faults. Google human design faults. You'll get a list of, I think, 25 odd of defective faults, in our makeup, our bodies, as a result of imperfect design. And as a person of a certain age, I'm very concerned about the prostate, the male prostate, and the difficulties that gives me, given my age. And you people will get there in due course.
Okay, thanks. Do you want to
respond to that?
And answer your question as well?
With regard to human imperfections, let's say 25 human design faults, counterweigh that with the thousands of perfections within the human body and the immune system and the way the eye works, and with so many other things, meaning the similitude I gave was like a person who enters a hall and he may observe that there's a few things that are missing, does not conclude that the entire whole is not made. Meaning there may be certain imperfections, and I'm saying that God placed those imperfections or perceived imperfections for a reason. And those reasons I've mentioned, one of those reasons is because this world is ephemeral, we're not here forever, the world is short-lived, and we move on to the next world. So again, looking at the entire picture, with regard to what you mentioned...
So you want me to thank God for the prostate, do you?
Yeah, it worked for you for 71 years.
Thank you very much.
The prostate, it worked for you for 71 years. You got to thank him. If you don't pay your bill for 71 years, then it's going to go defunct.
Do you want to just answer?
It's God, for goodness sake. He can fix it, but he didn't.
Okay. It's just
prayer.
We're in the last 10 minutes now, so
the Bible,
we're going to give it a round.
Question. With regard to the Bible, hopefully in the future we can hold a Christian and Muslim dialogue regarding the Bible and the Quran. But with regard to the Bible, the word Bible comes from Biblos, which is a number of books, but those books were compiled over a few hundred years, meaning thousands of years, from the first books of the Bible, from Genesis and from the time of Moses, and then over a period of time there were gaps in that time as well, when the Jews, the Bani Israel, when they were transported from Jerusalem to Babylon, they had to memorize the contents of the Bible. So Muslims say that the Bible, many errors and many mistakes entered the Bible, and this is where Christians and Muslims differ regarding the Bible. But because it was compiled over thousands of years, and the Quran was written and compiled and memorized in 23 years, and memorized by 110,000 people, memorized in its entirety, and in 110,000 people, and written and compiled in 23 years, and in that time, memorized by 110,000 people, the transmission we say is, well, he would disagree about perfection, we would say is the question is what?
Today's world, one person brought a law, you would say that person was crazy, stone him out. But if a couple of people, huge number of people get the same message,
I understand your question. The answer to that question is we do not reject those people. We accept Moses, we accept Jesus, we accept David, we accept Solomon, we accept all of them. What we reject is the transmission.
We're having a different debate here about between religions, not about God. So we're gonna end that one there. The people who have got their hands up, I've got you down, so I will come back to you. Let's take the question from here, and then we're going to head towards a wrap up. So we've got the brother there, the sister here. If you've already asked a question, I won't be able to come back to you. Please keep it very brief. Please keep your responses brief as well.
Hi, we talked about a lot about probabilities today, and other physicists, and especially atheist one like Paul Davies, he says the chance of spontaneous life occurring is 1 to the power of 26 or something. My question is it a bigger logical leap to assume that that came from nothing as opposed to something that there was like a cause for it? You don't need to call it God, just something that's external to that.
Okay, thank you. We've got that. Do you want to just
Yep.
quick response, please?
That's another thing that we and I'm talking about scientists, do not understand yet how life emerged. There are different theories about it. So again, you cannot rely on, you cannot place or found any philosophy or religion based on ignorance. Yep.
Okay, I won't get a chance for a response now. Let's just get these questions out of the way, and then we'll have closing statements. Yeah.
I've just got a quick comment before I ask my question. It'll take 2 seconds.
It's going to have to be quick.
Just a guy. The guy there mentioned, quoted ayahs from the Quran about murder, etc., etc. And then Guy responded with the 10 Commandments. I wouldn't rely on the 10 Commandments if it's something that you don't believe in when you provide a response. Now, secondly, my question is, if you drop a glass, it will break. It's inevitable. It's going to break. Someone could go back, melt it, bring it back to the way it was. It'll never heal. If you cut your finger, it will heal. So what are your comments on that? Is that science? Is that human intellect working there?
Okay, thank you. We've got that question. Right.
Yeah,
Body will heal.
yeah, body heals, that's biology. Drop glass, it smashes. Physics. Yeah.
Right. Okay, do you want to take the question from there? Yeah. Quick, please.
So my question's about a topic that was raised a few minutes ago about uncertainty. We can all be certain that everybody in this room is here, but given that our mothers all underwent the menstrual cycle and lost lots and lots of eggs, given that our fathers produced billions and billions of sperms, would you not agree that everybody here in this room, Shaykh, is here by chance?
This is an old interlocutor of mine, David Mill. Hi, David. It's not by it's not by chance that me and you are sitting here. No. Nothing happens by chance. This is where the argument of providence, the argument of which I didn't go into, the argument of providence. It's not by chance that you are the son of your parents. I'm the son of my parents, and we're sitting here. This is where we believe in divine power and the divine will.
God brought an egg together with a particular sperm. Is that what you're saying?
Again, like any occurrence in the universe and the galaxies that occurs, we believe it happens by the divine will.
Okay. Right, we've answered that one. Going to take the question from here.
Hi, my question is for Guy. I find it interesting when you were explaining your ethos in being certain in I don't know. You use the word you believe in creating your own existence and creating your own purpose. So why is it so hard for you to believe that there's something greater than you that created you? You must have a lot of faith in nothingness, if that's the case.
Faith? No, I don't find it difficult to believe in the possibility that there is a God and that there is something greater than me existing, i.e. God. That's not what atheism is about. Atheism is about not being convinced of the arguments that there is a God. Now, if somebody came and demonstrated God's existence to me, I'd be there. I believe it. But that has not happened. And throughout my life, I have been interested in the question, and I've considered the arguments for and against, and I've found the arguments for God wanting. And that's why, when it comes to purpose, we humanists create our own purposes. We decide what it is important in our lives. It's as simple as that. And the idea that we're needy for a God is to my mind, is rather sad.
I'm just going to take a question here from the gentleman in the grey. Final question will be the gentleman in the green at the top there, and then we're going to get the closing statements. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just put a few notes here, and I noticed that you said that, you know, obviously, you know, Bible can have flaws in it, and we know that to know God, it's a spiritual thing. I believe in faith. We can't see God, but we believe in him by faith. And we believe through his letter. You know, the question is which is the right letter? So I've just put a couple of things down here. I know we're going off track a little bit, but I've just put a couple of quotes. I'm going to make it quick from Quran. And it says in Quran from Surah chapter 2, verse 59, believers, Christians and Jews, they will have their reward with their Lord. So who's their Lord? Is that Allah or is that Jesus? Is the Muslim admitting that Jesus is Lord here? So then it says in Surah chapter 3, verse 79, he who chooses a religion other than Islam will not be accepted and in this next world lost. So what I want to know here is this is a clear contradiction in the book of the Quran. Can you explain this to me?
Okay. Your question should be, is this a clear contradiction?
Is this a clear contradiction?
Because the word Islam refers to submission to the Creator. That's what the word refers to. It does not refer to the revelation on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, only. It refers to the revelation upon all the previous prophets, also including Jesus. So when Allah says in the Quran that the word used is Nasara, which would mean the Nazareans, meaning because Jesus was from Nazareth. The followers of Jesus prior to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the ones who followed the true teachings of Jesus, and the Jews who followed the teachings of Moses correctly, and the followers of the Prophet Muhammad. And after those who follow these prophets correctly, they will enter paradise with their Lord, because they all follow one Lord, which is Allah, and they submitted to him, which is known as Islam. So we believe, our understanding of who Jesus was that Jesus preached monotheism in Jerusalem to the Jews and to others, and that was the true religion of Jesus, and a continuation of that was Islam.
Okay.
Can
I didn't let the Shaykh respond to the
okay.
last question.
I've got a couple of points to
we'll
make.
pick them up in the final
yeah.
comments.
Yeah.
Just the gentleman there, yeah.
Thank you for your time today, Guy and Shaykh. Guy, you've described, you used the word mental gymnastics quite a lot today for inductive and deductive arguments. And it seems like you require observable evidence for absolutely everything. Are you able to provide observable empirical evidence today that you have a great-great-great-great-grandmother without inferring? We know, don't tell me it's biology, I know it's biology. Are you able to provide observable empirical evidence today that you have a great-great-great-great-grandmother?
Is that your question? Okay, thank you.
It's a somewhat boring question. I actually have documentary evidence of my great-great-great-grandmother.
Okay, let's go back 20 greats.
I mean,
let's go back 50 greats.
Take it back
Principle
10
is
or
the
20, you know, great-great-great-greats, and nobody has that evidence, but we're all still here. It's boring.
That's not empirical.
Boring. Yeah.
All right. I think we're gonna have to leave it there. Do you want to just give your final thought, and we'll take a final thought from you, and then we'll wrap it up.
My final thought on this issue is, if you want to reach a state of certainty with regard to the existence of God, then you would have to reach that state of certainty through recognizing ubudiyyah, servitude to Allah, which means that every human here would know the answer within themselves. Within themselves, they would know the answer. When in your dying days, you are dying, eventually you will call out to a God. Which God is that? That is the first cause of the universe, who has the attributes of eternalness, divine power, divine will, dissimilarity to creation, and self-sufficiency. This is the divine power and the divine who controls and made the universe.
Thank you. Just before Guy gives his final thought, there are feedback forms on your desks in front of you. Please complete them before you leave. That really helps Hamza and his team at Madinah Society to put on these events and improve them going forward. We'll have Guy's final thought.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for a really fascinating evening. Firstly, I would want to sort of point out that I don't think the Shaykh has actually produced any actual evidence for God's existence. Not a surprise, because the only evidence is actually mental gymnastics or logical deductions. And those are all things that happen in your head. We need something happening, that is tangible and real, or observable. That's one point. But thank him anyway. I thank him anyway. And as far as faith is concerned, is there anything that you could not believe based on faith? You could be a Mormon. You could be a Scientologist. You could worship Prince Philip on faith. So faith is not a reliable method to determine truth or reality.
Is the mind sufficient? Is the mind sufficient?
This is going to be a final. It's meant to be a final thought,
and my final point is.
Let me have a final gymnastics with Guy after everyone else stays.
Well, before you
it's
do
the
that,
Olympics now. We're just going to
before you do that, can I just talk about Jesus for a second? You'd be interested to know I have some views about Jesus, and the interesting thing is that there's a growing number of scholars who doubt Jesus existed at all. Bart Ehrman, Richard Carrier, David Fitzgerald, Robert Price. All of these people have written books.
But that would be contradicted by Josephus, the historian who was actually a contemporary of Jesus. And
No, he
wrote.
wasn't.
He came slightly after, but
Josephus got his information from groups of Christians. No, this is a very interesting move, and it not only undermines Christianity, but it's going to undermine Islam as well. So it's something that you people have got to look at and understand.
But how could you reject Josephus's Antiquities, where he mentions the existence?
Josephus is dealt with in detail in these books. We haven't got time.
Right. Well, I think we're gonna leave it there. We don't have time. So thank you everybody for coming.